I welcome everyone joining us for this workshop on board self-assessment and the roles and responsibilities facilitated by Tricia Lubach, the Director of Leadership Development of the Washington State School Directors Association. Me gustaría dar una bienvenida a todos uniéndonos para este taller de evaluación propia, papeles y responsabilidades de la mesa directiva del distrito escolar, facilitado por Tricia Lubach, la directora de desarrollo por liderazgo de la WASDA. And at that point, Tricia, it is our honor and privilege, and we're very grateful that you come to help us through this stage in our learning, and it is your show.
Only my show if I get the microphone on, right? So great, thank you so much for having me here today. It's lovely to see you. Some of you I've
So one of the things that
closer.
we have a very sensitive system. And if you can't hear yourself,
She's going to be talking all the time. Maybe we swap with you with a gooseneck one.
are you comfortable with the city? Because I know she thought you might.
I will be moving.
Okay, so let's
Yeah.
stay there.
Stay here. Okay.
Yeah,
Okay.
Just hear yourself through the speakers and then we know we're good on.
Okay, good. I am definitely not singing now that I hear myself coming through. Well, really nice to meet all of you. I had a chance to go around and just introduce myself to each of you individually, which I really appreciate. And thank you, Dr. Gordon, for having me here today. Some of you know me and know my background, and some of you don't. But I actually live in Quincy, and I have been on the school board in Quincy. I'm in my 17th year. So I have a lot of years of experience as a school director. I also work in Olympia and am a bit of a road warrior back and forth. I did Zoom before all the rest of you were on Zoom. You all crashed my party. But I have been with the Washington State School Directors Association for about 8 years now, and really handle all of the training and professional development and events for WASDA, and have seen some of you at annual conference, and back when we did regional meetings. We'll be resuming regional meetings again this spring, hopefully. But I've really learned a lot over my 17 years of school board experience, as I'm sure I don't have to tell you all. And one of the things that I learned both in working with school boards and in being one myself is that it's really hard for the group of 6 of you, the board superintendent team, to really have time to talk together deeply about the things that matter in your district, because our board meetings aren't generally set up that way, and they're pretty formal. But what I see myself as is a guide for all of you today, to guide you in some conversations, help you uncover things you either did or didn't know about yourselves as a team and as individuals, and have those conversations. That sound good? We're all game for that. Great. Just a couple of logistical things. Wanted to just let you all know, obviously this is a public meeting, of course. We're on Zoom, and anyone who wanted to be here in public can be. We're going to be doing a lot of teaming up and having conversations in pairs. And so just like they wouldn't be able to hear all of the conversations if a person were in the room, in the audience, people on viewing this remotely won't be able to hear all of them either. They'll hear the same thing, snippets. But in every case that you have a conversation in a pair, we'll be coming back and having whole group conversation to share out what you did. Are there any questions about that piece? Okay, just wanted to make sure that you were good there. So you all have a couple things in terms of materials in front of you, and I'd like to have a chance to go around and do a quick introduction with each other, but you have a really nice notebook from Dr. Gordon with, or Kim, thank you, Kim, with the results, a report with your board self-assessment, which we'll dive into here in a few minutes. And then you also have what's called a ranking report, and I'll go over both of those with you. You don't have to have looked at that ahead of time. You have time to do that here together. So don't worry about not having previewed that. The other thing that you have is you have a white folder from me. And if you haven't opened that up, I just want to walk you through what's in it. You have an agenda. We'll touch on the agenda in just a minute. And then you have a couple of other items. On the right-hand side, you have a copy of this, your school board standards. We'll cover that. 4 articles that I'm going to refer to as we go through some of our work today. And then you have a worksheet over on the left-hand side that looks like this, and it's double-sided, and you will use that when you get into your pairs. Okay, does everybody have all those materials? Looks like most of you do, so I'm just watching around the room. So let's start with the agenda. The way we have it broken out is just we're in the logistics and connections piece right now. As you look at our agenda, we're going to spend almost 2 hours unpacking the board self-assessment. And again, the power that you'll find of the board self-assessment isn't the self-assessment itself, but the conversations you have around what the results are from that. So we'll spend a good chunk of time there, and then we have a little bit of time at the end, about 45 minutes, to which will build on the earlier conversations around roles and responsibilities of the board superintendent team. So any questions about logistics or the agenda, how we're working together? Okay, great. So take a look at the first 3 questions here. I'd like to just take a moment. It helps me get to know you a little bit better. And in some cases, when you have a newer team, it helps you get to know each other a little bit better too. So the first one is a selfish question for me. If our time together were successful, what would that look like? So our time together today would feel successful if. So if you can think about that a little, if you want to write it down on your sheet, you can. If you don't, I'm just going to ask you to share it out. And then the other thing that I think teams don't always spend time learning about or thinking about with each other are the second 2 questions, which is, can you share an area in which you bring strength as an individual? So it might be your experience, your knowledge, your perspective, or something else, but you bring that strength to the board as an individual. Because each of you have multiple areas of strength that you bring to this team. And then the third question is connected to that, and that's, can you share an area where you'd like to develop or increase a skill, whether it's your experience, your knowledge, your perspective, as a member of this board superintendent team or as an individual. And we'll just go around the room. Is there anybody who'd really, I'll give you just a minute of think time. I just let you know. No, we don't need to do it yet. But actually, yeah, go ahead. If you don't mind putting that up, yeah, that'd be great. They can see the opening graphic that way.
Unless somebody else wants to do it, I can break the ice and make everybody else feel more relaxed. So let me know when it's time to start.
Do you want to go ahead, Martin? Looks like I think people are ready. Thank you.
Right, let's go. I haven't really thought about the first one, but I think the more we find corners that we haven't noticed and looked into, that will be very valuable. And the other thing I would think about is if we get rid of inhibitions about everything related to being on the board and working with each other.
Great, thank you. Maria, can I pick on you since you're vice president and you're next to Martin?
The word that comes to mind is empathy. I think if we can empathy for the situations, the unique situations that our life experience and the students that we are here to serve.
Thank you. Laura?
Yes. So our time today would be feel successful to me if we end up with a common understanding of how we are to interact with each other and roles and responsibilities, that kind of thing. I have the longest longevity on the board, so that's basically what one of the things that I bring. And then in terms of developing or increasing my strength as a board member, I know that we have maybe now more than ever a diversity of opinion in different areas on the board. And so I hope that I can be a person who helps tease out those thoughts of every member and make everybody feel heard. And when we reach a decision, we all feel like we have fully participated.
Thank you. Julie?
Sure. So I think our time together would feel successful if we could have some engaging and positive conversations among our board so that we leave feeling more like a cohesive team, especially when we disagree, but having the positive disagreements so that we're all feeling respected and heard and everything. Do you want me to move down to the other ones? Or
We'll jump back to
Okay.
that. So Paul, how about you?
For our time together today, to be successful, building on those relationships, getting to know each other better, and then collectively kind of our goals and outcomes that we're seeking as we go through the board self-assessment.
Perfect.
For me, I kind of feel like the time is already successful because being as new as I am, just having the experience of being together with you all is a big thing and something that I already feel it's successful because I'm really looking forward to this time and getting to know people better and learning. I have so much to learn. So.
That's great. Yeah, I agree. Just devoting some time to work together as a team is such a great investment. So now I'm going to put Paul on the spot. Let's go back down. Let's share 2 and 3 together. So an area where you bring strength to the team and also an area you'd like to develop or increase your strength. And you tried to give it to me.
I think the area of strength that I bring is 11 years of district leadership working with boards and 3 different school districts.
How about an area where you'd like to develop or increase your strength?
So the area that I want to increase is purposefully connecting with each board member on an individual basis, at least on a monthly basis. Just in the past week or 2, I think we were doing some nice work around that, just connecting with board members. I really want to continue that.
Great. Okay. How about you, Julie?
So one of the strengths I have is I'm a government attorney. So I bring a background of understanding how agencies like the district and boards operate. But an area that I would like to learn and improve is general district operations. What makes Wenatchee School District tick? What are our staff doing on a regular basis? What are our students really engaged in? And then, building a relationship with the other board members. Just I know the mechanics of it all, but now it's really being a player in it.
Excellent. Thank you. Laura?
I think I overachieved and already answered the question.
So I heard the strength, and maybe I missed the strength was your ability to bring your sport experience and allow folks to consider diversity of opinion. Did I state that correctly?
Correct.
Okay, and I missed the part you'd like to develop.
To being a facilitator of conversation.
So I only got 50% on that one, didn't I? Thank you.
So I bring experience. I dedicated my whole professional career to education. I spent 13 of those years here in Wenatchee Public Schools. And I think also my life perspective and experiences are relatable to a lot of the community that we serve. In regards to areas for myself to develop an increase in strength would be increase and continue to develop the relationship with my colleagues here on the board. And not just on a professional level, but also maybe on a more personal level.
Thank you, Maria.
Okay, I didn't realize before I was on the board what I thought I would most use, and that's my development economist background. I use it most, and it's relevant and effective in the context of being somebody who's from outside education, but is a consumer and has had a lot of knowledge of what it can do to the workforce. And just throwing out words that the way I look at it is investment, especially in human capital, cost benefit, systems that are conducive to improvement, motivation versus inertia. So I intentionally like to look from outside, and I think that's an asset. I'm going to end with what I wrote at the end, which is to learn patience and how to handle the anxiety of being in a spotlight. And where that comes from really is how to navigate the unfamiliar procedures of the public sector. To me, there are rigidities compared to what I'm seeing as a natural, fluid, and iterative, shape-shifting ways that I'm used to working together to be creative, to solve problems. And you have this very strict structure, and you've really got to learn how to be human, patient, effective through it. And that's what I need a ton of help in.
That's great. On the way here, I was listening to NPR, and one of the reporters was referring to a politician who accidentally used their outside voice instead while making a statement. And I thought, that's a great description. Darn, I should have used my inside voice. And there is really that anxiety there. Absolutely. Like, okay, consciously use my inside voice right now. I loved that comparison. So, Catherine.
Well, I have absolutely zero experience in this realm. I've been a nurse for 26 years. Never thought I'd be in this adventure. Although I have parents who are teachers, it was not anything I ever thought I would be involved in education. I am gaining knowledge. I've taken and thoroughly enjoyed the time going to each school in the district. I've just got a few left, but speaking with the principals and trying to gain the knowledge of what's going on. I think I bring a different perspective. I bring the perspective of a mother of a high schooler at the high school. I think is a different perspective that I bring, although many have had, or, have kids in the district, but particularly at the high school in the past. But I think I bring this perspective of a parent in the community, and because I spent 7 months campaigning for this position with, I think it ended up being 11 or 12 meet and greets and public forums and Kiwanis groups and Rotary Club, and speaking with parents and community members about what concerns them in regards to the schools today. And so I think I bring that perspective a little bit. It was really, really intense, and a lot of interaction with the public and what their concerns are and what they would want their school board to look like. Clearly, there is a lot of area to develop and increase my strength, experience, knowledge, and I'm open to all of that.
Is there one you'd like to start with?
The experience, again, never been on any kind of board, so it's all new to me, and I have everything to learn.
Excellent. Great. Thank you. Did you all learn a little something new about each of you? Yeah, maybe. It's all new for some of you, right? So great. Thank you very much. That helps me understand all of you better, and hopefully you learned a little something new about one or more of your teammates here. Appreciate that. So we're going to jump into, I'm going to spend about 10 minutes walking you through some information. That little guy is here to just tell us we can do it today. I thought if there's a week or a month where we could use him, there we go. Like we can do it. We are glad you're here. So let's see if my clicker works. Where am I pointing it? Here? I hear it too. Oh, it's just, there we go. Okay, great. So the board self-assessment itself is based on the Washington State School Board standards. And so I'm going to just spend a few minutes walking you through this. This is really the only point in the day at which I'll do a little bit of talking at you, and it's going to be limited. Like I said, it'll just take about 10 minutes, but I think it'll be helpful for you to have some background knowledge to understand, first of all, what is this board self-assessment? What are these standards that it's based on? And more importantly, frankly, does any of it really matter? Because I think that's a fair question. And so I've given you some materials. Some of them you'll want to take home and spend some time with, and other materials we're going to go through today. So as you, again, look at your packet, what I'd love to have you do is take out the items that are on the right-hand side. So it's the standards, and then these articles that are in green, because we're going to talk about those a little bit as I walk through them. So I think I'm going to move over here with this because I'm the one person who has my back to my slides. Let me see if this has that for sound. That works. Okay, great. One of the questions is, do board actions really matter? Do they make a difference? You all devote a lot of time to this work. And so I think by you being here, you believe that that matters. But it's important to understand why and how. So we're going to look a little bit at some research that talks about, what does it look like for you in terms of boardsmanship? What are the areas that really make a difference around boardsmanship, and for good or for bad? Again, we'll also look at the board standards and your self-assessment survey, and then we'll talk a little bit about what we know from multi-state data. And then at the end, kind of talk about, you will naturally have some conversations as you go through the board self-assessment about behaviors that you'd like to see and what that you really want to strive for as a board. So here's one of the most important initial studies around board work. There is tons and tons of research around the efficacy of teachers, principals, superintendents, schools in general, the education system. But a lot of the time, the research has left out school boards, and they have a unique role in our K-12 education, and yet haven't been studied very much. One of the first important studies around boardsmanship and whether or not boards make any difference. Ultimately, you're all here because you hope to make a difference for the kids in your district. Families, of course, but really kids. And so does it matter? And the Lighthouse studies, which were done in Oregon way back in 1998, they continued actually for a number of years, really did show that boards of high-performing districts behave differently than boards of low-performing districts. They could connect different behaviors to different outcomes. And what they did is they actually spent some time watching boards and then comparing them to student achievement outcomes. And here's what they found. So for those districts that really have low performing students, again, this is not perfect because there are lots of measures of student success other than assessment scores, but that's one thing that's pretty easily available from all states. Those that had really low performing districts, their board meetings were less orderly. They didn't spend a lot of time talking about student achievement, not listening respectfully and attentively to who's speaking. Members are advancing their own agenda. I'll let you read through this. We've all seen board meetings like this. We've perhaps all been in one or more. So they're not pleasant meetings to be in. But I think the thing that's interesting is that they were really the first ones to be able to connect these behaviors in meetings to lower poor student outcomes. So that really is what a lot the Washington school board standards is based on. Now, the standards were developed back in, 2004, I believe. They are in the process of being updated this year. That's part of my work that I'm doing. But if you take a look at the standards and open it up, so go ahead and take it out and open it to page 1. You'll see down at the bottom of the page there that really it's broken up into 5 core principles. The first one is responsible school district governance. 2 is communication of and commitment to high expectations for student learning. 3, creating conditions district-wide for student and staff success. 4 is holding the district accountable for student learning. And the last one, number 5, is engagement of the community in education. Those are the 5 big buckets. And as we have moved into updating these standards, those continue to be buckets that we're looking at. We are making some changes to some of the details on the inside, but those buckets really remain the same. If you go ahead and flip now, just flip over 1 page to, go ahead and go to page 4. So you can see here, actually, sorry, go ahead and flip back to 3 because I think it's easier for you to see there. You can see that standard number 1 is covered on page 3. And then under that standard, there is a benchmark of success and indicators for evaluation. So the first benchmark of success under providing responsible school district governance is conducting board and district business in a fair, respectful, and responsible manner. And then look over at the indicators, those questions. There you can see are 6 indicators that indicate whether or not you're meeting that benchmark. If those look familiar to you, they should, because those are the questions on the board self-assessment. That's where the board self-assessment questions come from. If you turn to the next page, page 4, you can see there are some additional benchmarks within the standard. This one has benchmarks A through F, which is over on page 6. So you can see there are a lot of questions in here that help lead to the responses on the board self-assessment. I actually, as a school board member, took the self-assessment a number of times before really understanding where they even came from. So I think it's really important to walk back and show you this is where they come from. So what you will see today then is that those questions in terms of asking you, how well do you think you align as a board to these standards, is what then informs the data that we're going to look at later on. Does that make sense? Any questions about that? So we just went through all of those. And if I'd had this in front of me, I would have seen that and walked them through them with you. So there has been some interesting, let me get back down here. There's been some interesting additional research around this about, well, how do the board standards, we know that the work of boards does make a difference in terms of student outcomes, but how well do these align? So some of you may have, I suspect particularly Laura, since you've been on the board a long time, but maybe some of the rest of you have too. We have a couple of researchers out of Montana State University who have done a lot of research within multiple states around our board standards, because there are 4 other states who license the standards and the board self-assessment from us. Those are Texas, Oregon, Arizona, and Minnesota, and Montana. And so they have taken a look at, okay, let's really dive down into that research around board actions and how they're connected to student outcomes. And so what they have found is that just like you saw board actions connected to poor outcomes for students, there are also board actions that are connected with high achieving districts. And so I'll let you take a look through these. These are in order. These are the top 10 board actions within the board standards that are linked to high student assessment. So take a look at that, and I'm going to pause and let you read and then share with me what you see. Does anything pop out at you? Mhm. I bet it does. Welcome. Well, yeah. Welcome to part of your orientation. Yeah. And you can bring that one back to her if she says that again, right? Some of them are pretty high level, aren't they? You know, in particular, if you look at number 1, that communication of high expectations, how you treat people, fostering collaboration, committing to a clear and shared purpose. Most of them are pretty high level, which is interesting. You've got a few that are more detailed, like number 6 is a little bit more specific in terms of being related to the curriculum. And so is 9 when it talks about the budget. But really, these are big the ultimate outcome from the work that these researchers did, and their names are Dr. Ivan Lawrenson and Dr. William McCaw. These are their articles, these 4. What they really have learned from their multi-state research, which is quite consistent from state to state, which is interesting if you think about Washington, Arizona, Texas, Montana, all having some similar outcomes, Minnesota as well. They really do. They're very similar. In most cases, the top 10 are the top 10 across all 5 states. They're just switched in some order, which really was kind of shocking to me. But this is really the ultimate a decision from all of this, or the ultimate conclusion is that board actions really do matter, and that in those districts where there's a high level of chaos and disarray, whether it's in the board meeting or in other areas, it really does impact how students do. So the other piece around this, and I'm not going to spend a lot of time on it, but if you look in here on page 15, there are also individual school director standards. So if I, as a board member, am behaving myself and collaborating with all of you really nicely in meetings, but I am going out and exhibiting unethical behavior as an individual in my role as a board member, once I'm outside that board meeting, it's really hard to overcome those kinds of challenges. So I want you to take a look. I'm not going to go through all of these slides. I'll jump through them, but you can see on page 15, there are also some individual standards, which is why I had you talk a little bit about what are some of your individual strengths, and also where are some areas that you'd like to learn, because we can all become board members, better board members individually, and we also have to become better board members together collectively. One person exhibiting highly ethical behavior doesn't overcome everyone else. So I think these will be helpful for you too. If you just take a look at them, they're really centered around values and ethical behavior, leadership, communication, professional development, which is what you're doing right now, and accountability. And board self-assessment is really accountability for all of you too. So you can check a couple off of them just for today, right? I won't jump through all of these for you. You can take a look at them. Oh, okay, we're done. We can turn that off. Yeah. So we're going to dive in. Questions? I promised I wouldn't talk at you for too long. So let's go ahead and dive in. Oh, let me say a word about these articles. These are for you to read. I would highly encourage you all to read them and schedule some time at your next board meeting to talk about them a little bit. So they are Why Boardsmanship Matters, The Science of Student Achievement, Failure to Govern, and Staying the Course. And they talk very specifically, these were actually published in the Texas Lone Star magazine, which is that is the member publication by the Texas School Board Association. And Laura knows my former colleague, Phil Gore, who was in my position in WASDA for a long time and did a lot of work around the standards, helped establish the standards, and also started the work with Dr. Lawrenson and Dr. McCaw. So we continue to work together in our 2 very different states and with school boards and school board members. But it is interesting how much overlap there is in the research. It really is pretty linked. So those are for your reading, for just a little light reading for later. And then let's go ahead and open up your 2 reports, which Dr. Gordon put into the notebook for you. And I'll tell you how we're going to attack those. So you have, this is what I'll have you get out. So I'm going to have you get out 3 different documents. Mine are not stapled because I flipped through them a little bit more. So one of them is your board self-assessment. Let's see. It is the giant report. It's this one. So the first page looks like this. Yep, there you go. The one at the very beginning. Okay. This is your report based on this year's results, as well as the results you got the last time I was here, which was 2017, 2016, and 2013. So the Wenatchee School Board has taken this self-assessment 4 times over the years. You, of course, are a different team every time, because every time a member changes, the team changes. So there are a lot of changes since 2017, including the superintendent. But it is interesting to look at some longitudinal data. So we'll cover that. The second document that you have, which is probably is behind it, looks like this. And it is called the Board Self-Assessment Survey Score Ranking. And this is probably a new document even for Laura, because this is something we've developed over the last couple of years. And this is a little bit of a shortcut to getting at which areas you rated yourselves the highest and which areas you rated yourselves the lowest. And it also looks at standard deviation, which looks at how far apart some of the answers were on your questions. So you are going to use these 2 documents quite a bit. These are your textbooks that we're going to use today. And what I'm going to have you do is spend some time working in pairs. We're going to do 3 rounds. So the first round is looking at areas of strength. So each round is going to be about a half an hour. You're going to have about 10 minutes, 25 minutes to 30 minutes total for each round. You're going to have about 10 minutes in pairs to talk about, the first round will be areas of strength. Where are some areas that you as a board rated yourselves highly? Okay, that's the first one. Second round, obviously, is going to be looking at some areas where you rated yourselves the lowest. What are those items? What does it mean? And then the third round is the rainbow round. And that's where we've got all kinds of responses. And I'll give you some shortcuts to be able to find them quickly, because going through the 42-page report to find them all it kind of takes a long time. So let's walk through. And I have pairs assigned for you. You're going to have a different pair for each of the 3 rounds. That gives you a little bit of time to chat with each other, to really dive into some of the self-assessment together with each other. So now if you can take out of I think a lot of you have it out, take out your worksheet. This is a really, really simple little tool for you. And so the first round is green. You're going to look through the materials here, and I'll give you some hints in a minute. And this is simply a worksheet for you to be able to list some things from your conversation so that you can remember the items that are important that you want to share out with the whole group, because you'll have some time to do that. So as you go through your first round, it's on areas of strength, and you can look at these 3 questions. These are 3 suggested questions for you. You may delve down into some additional questions, and that's just fine. But overall, I want you to take a look at them and see among those areas where your board indicated that you think you have strengths, were there some patterns? Were they clustered mainly in 1 or 2 standard areas? Again, keep in mind there are 5 standard areas. So, are they clustered in 1 or a couple? Common themes, what do you see? And then this one's really important. Why is this a strength? And how can our board remain strong and continue to improve in this area? You will be tempted as you go through here to flip that strength around and say, well, we do this really well, but we don't do this really well. Try to resist that. There's a reason we start with strengths. It's easier to build on your strengths. And so you want to identify what are the things we really as a board think are our strengths. How do we build on those? That then gives you the ability to then look at those areas where you didn't rate yourselves as highly and really have the confidence to dive into those. So again, second round is going to be on opportunities for growth. Third round is on the back. It's in the orange box. It has areas of opportunity for increased cohesiveness. And then if you want, as we get through this, especially as you get to the third round, you may have some recurring themes that come up to you. And you're welcome to record those over on the right-hand side. No one's taking these from you. No one's going to read them. They're just for you to keep track of your notes as you have conversations with each other. So let's walk through the first one, and then I'll put you into your teams. Okay. So let's take the ranking sheet, and you can see these are over on the left-hand side. There is a score that says average, and all of them on the first page are in green. That's probably fairly obvious. Those are your areas of strength, right? So as you go across, you've got the average, and then you have a minimum and maximum. So as you look at your report, you will have rated things always, most of the time, some of the time, never, or don't know. Always is worth 4 points. Most of the time is 3. Some of the time is 2. Never is 1. Don't know this is important, especially since we have one very new board member. Don't know counts for 0, but it is not included in the average. You don't get lower points for having a newer board member who doesn't know something. What it does is, as you go through here, you're not pulling the average down, Catherine, don't worry. But as you go through here, if you run across one that's in black, that means don't know. That orientation, this is a great place to start, because you're going to go, oh, here are some of the things Catherine doesn't know about. Let's make it, no, it's good, because probably some others don't too. I will note there's more than one don't know on this. And so it's great, because that identifies here are the areas where you can dig into in reports and things like that. So that's how those are connected. On that ranking report, if you go to the last page, you can see that there are some items that are in red. Those obviously are the ones that you scored yourselves the lowest on. I don't know why those that are over on page 4 aren't in red, that have a score of 2. So go ahead and take a look over on page 4. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. 8 of them have a score of 2. Go ahead and circle those 2. Those should be red as well. You can see the next one up has a score of 2.2. So that's where you'll really dive in your pairs. You can take a look at that. So let's say that you're really interested in, since you all are circling those right now, let's say you're really interested in question number 70. So that would have been the first one that you just circled. Again, if you look at the top, it says Q number. That's which question number it is on your survey. So this says, to what extent does our board communicate district performance to the public in clear and understandable ways? You can then, if you'd like, jump over to the survey. You don't have to do this with all of them, but if you really would like to dig into that, this will be especially important when we get to the rainbow round. But you can go back on to question number 70, which happens to be on, I had to pick one at the very end, didn't I? It happens to be on page 39. So you can look at question number 70, again, in this report. And you can identify, oh, well, one person said, we do this most of the time. 3 people said some of the time, and 1 person said never. So not only is that one where you overall identified yourselves as rating yourselves pretty low, it also qualifies for rainbow round because you have really different responses. And that's often true. You'll often find the areas that sometimes you'll be very consistent in saying, we as a team really don't think we do the best job here. And again, we're not here to beat you up. The self-assessment is all about learning what you're doing well and really doubling down on that, and also setting some goals in the areas you don't think you're performing as well. That's what it's all about. So it's not a scorecard. Okay. Did I totally confuse you, or are you following me? You're good? Okay. So let's see. Let me find my list of the pairs that we put together. So what I would suggest actually is that one pair may want to stay here in the U, and other pairs might want to scatter over here and over there, so that you have the ability to just talk with each other. It can get kind of loud when you have that many groups talking together. But here is the first pairing. So the first one you're going to look at is the areas of strength, and have Martin and Maria. How handy that you're sitting together, right? Martin and Maria paired together, Laura and Julie, and Catherine and Paul. And so, but some of you have to move. I did this yesterday. I had no idea how you'd all be sitting together. And so I'm going to give you about 10 minutes. I'll come around and give you about a 1-minute warning, and you're going to be mad at me because it won't be enough time. But get down as many things as you can. Okay. And we'll start now. 10 minutes sounded like a long time, didn't it? So great. I know that you didn't have enough time to discuss and dig into all the things that you wanted to. The nice thing is that in 3 rounds, you'll continue to see more things. And that's why there's that 4th column on the notes page for you to write down things that occur to you as you go through not only the strengths, but then the areas of weakness and the areas where there's kind of scores all over the board. So there were a couple things I neglected and to explain to you. You probably figured them out, but in order to be super clear, you probably realize that in your report, this page has all of your longitudinal data on it. So this is the aggregate data. So if you look at standard number 1 for 2022, basically what that is, the bar across the top, that's the aggregate average of all of the benchmark questions for standard 1. And there are a number of them, of course. So just so that you know that, the thing that's helpful about this is you can see how things change over time. I will note you have been in a pandemic for 2 years. It would be very odd to encounter a board that hasn't seen more chaos over the last 2 years than in previous years. So I don't want you to be beating yourselves up over it. That is at least part of it. There may be some other reasons as well, but just wanted to point that out to you. And then, of course, that correlates. You can see the changes here in the individual scores. So like as you're looking at this, you can see how you rated on each particular benchmark question in all 4 of the years that you've taken it. Again, just to clarify, last thing, the score ranking, this is only your scores from this year. So we want to really, it's good to have the longitudinal data to see trends over time, but it's also really helpful, I think, to dive into the ranking survey. So we've got about 15 minutes for conversation here. Each team is going to have some time to share out. If you sort of share equally, each team would have about 5 minutes. Although I find often the first team shares a lot and the second 2 teams agree and add some things. And it can turn into a bit of a circular conversation, and that's just terrific. So anyone want to jump in there and share out first what you saw in terms of patterns, some common themes, what you learned about yourselves in terms of areas of strength?
I didn't write very much down, so I switched out that we're the long one that everyone builds on. But, we spent a lot more time just looking, I think, being the first time we've seen this, spending a lot of time just looking at the data and comparing, looking year over year. But I think what jumped out at us the most is the areas we seem to excel in category 3, which was the creating conditions for success. We had a lot of 3s. A lot of our highest marks were from that category 3. And looking at them, it looked like we were excelling in areas where it was more objective actions or criteria. So a lot of adopting the budget, adopting policies, things of that nature. So it seems like we were very strong fairly across the board in some of those more objective measurements.
Thank you. Laura, do you have anything to add to that?
No, she did a wonderful job.
Excellent. Okay. How about Maria and Martin?
Yeah, so we actually saw a pattern as well in standard 3, but within standard 3, what came out, what was in the areas that we came more of a consensus with a lot of more green was with anything related to budget and fiscal responsibility. Quite a bit. We also, I don't know, I went through this data and noticed that the data was a little bit skewed because there was a lot of also don't knows. So it kind of looks better on paper than in the summary. But where the focus was in regards to the budget and the communication and receiving input. Why I we talked a little bit about this, but this is a process that we're continuously engaged in. We see it every 2 weeks in our board packets. We get regular communication from Jeanette, and we are, it's just something that we engage in the process early on. There's only a few months where we don't engage in full communication, where we just get the board report. And I think this is why, and obviously there's always room for improvement as to how do we reach out further than what happens in board meetings.
So there's a real intentional ongoing focus
Yes,
on those
absolutely.
areas. Yeah.
Martin?
So is it a chicken or an egg thing? You know, like if there are some other areas where you set really intentional and ongoing attention, would that make a difference? Potentially. Martin?
I'll say much the same thing as Julie and Maria, and almost makes me want to break your rule about what order we do things in. Because in the same words, it's where there was a process, a verification, documentation. Those are the areas which, generally speaking, were rated highly. And there's a question of what's not there,
Mhm.
you know, which are using my words, expansionist ones, outreach and communication, or we were playing around. You didn't necessarily, we said the word spirit.
Yeah.
Or animo, and it's what I wanted to say in Spanish. Those are the heart kind of things we didn't spend so much time on. We didn't rate ourselves so highly on. So, but it's pretty much the same as what Julie said.
So what your board has focused on regularly are the areas where you rated yourselves pretty highly, where you have a process around them. Maybe I should pose that as a question. Do you think that's true? Might not be true in all of them.
Maybe not necessarily. We engage in policies also on a regular basis.
Mhm.
I would say about 2 weeks. And just looking at standard 3 in the data, 34 policies, 35 policies. There's quite a bit of don't knows. So I'm not sure if that's an accurate statement.
Are you looking at question 34?
Yeah,
Is that where
30,
you were?
starting with 33, 34, 35, 36, 37.
Yep. right.
All are policy based,
Mhm.
and there's quite a bit of black there. And yet we engage in those conversations. We have a policy committee and we present policies every 2 weeks, first, second read. And it's not reflected in like it is on a budget where we engage also regularly.
That's a really interesting thing that you bring up. And there's a difference between knowing that you have a policy and knowing whether or not that policy is doing what it was intended to do. And that sometimes shows up in this survey. So for example, if you look at number 35, do we have a policy that ensures the hiring and retention of highly qualified staff? I'm sure you have some policies related to that. But there also is room for the question of, are the policies actually getting at that goal? So they may not be, but that's an area where you all can, you might know there's a policy, but the large number of I don't knows here makes me wonder if you all are also wondering, but does that actually get to its goal? So just some considerations as you look through the data.
Yeah.
Martin, you look like you.
Yeah, if you look at the timeline and you see that there's more blacks in 2022 than any other time, which, might be outside influencer, but also I think could indicate other people talked about cohesiveness, and that's why you're here. So again, linking that statistic to speculation, they're just indicators that we might follow up. But if you're going to go from process to something more, then you're needing interaction, cohesion.
Yeah, that was actually one of my questions that I just had in general, and keeping my mind in doing this exercise at all is, would these responses be different in a few months, even with new members having more time, this board having more time to work together? Because what of the past few months is reflected in some of the results. But then to hit Maria's comment about the policies, I agree. We're very good about bringing policies up and having a policy review committee and working on policies regularly. I think what the survey may reflect is that every policy is a little different, whereas we're talking about the same budget every meeting or the same types of things, whereas policies, yes, we're going to hit policies every meeting, but they might be different policies. So it's when the questions are phrased a little bit more to specific policies, that's where I could see why there's maybe less cohesion on some of that.
It's a great point. They cover a lot of different topics. Policies do. Yeah. Maria and Martin, anything else from you? Okay. All right, group three. Passing the buck.
We would absolutely echo everything that's been said. Yeah, the piece that kind of rings true to us is, especially around the budget, it's all planned. It's calendarized. So we know, and the board has made that a high expectation. There's a lot of conversation each time we have around budget. There's a high engagement from the board on those pieces, and there's expectations. I think about the last two times we talked about budget. Each time there was always an ask by the board to either relook at something, do something a little bit differently. So there's this high engagement. But the piece that it's scheduled. It's a regular expectation. And we know that cadence for that to occur. And I think that's one of those pieces, as I cheated and went into the red a little bit. I mean, are those other pieces, what gets valued, what gets monitored, gets done. And the budget is something, as Maria said, that is regular, that we see throughout the entire year.
Do you have a board calendar of topics that you cover on a
We
regular
have a
basis?
general one,
Uh-huh.
but we haven't had the topics put into it specifically, other than quite honestly budget issues.
Yeah. So you all bring up a really important point. As I let you get into the red, we get to do red next. You think about that a little bit. Are these topics that maybe you don't have a defined process for? They're not on your calendar. You don't have a regular schedule of reviewing those things. Some of them may be, some of them may not. So any other observations around strengths here? They'll continue to come up, and we'll come back and be able to regroup at the very end and wrap it up. But if not, I will put you into your groups for the next round. I've lost my list. I have way too many papers up here. Let's see. So next grouping. Here somewhere. Let's see. We're going to take a look at areas for growth. So those are going to be on your last two pages. I had you circle a couple of extra ones. So the pairs here are Laura and Catherine, Martin and Julie, and Maria and Paul. We'll give you another 10 minutes to do that, and then we'll come back. Are you dancing?
Yeah.
Okay, go ahead and wrap up your conversations on this one. You have no home to come back to. You have no home to come back to. Was it as satisfying as you hoped it would be to dive into the red areas? Yeah, it feels good, doesn't it? It's January. How can we improve ourselves, right? Although it's, what is it, the 20th? So you know, your first 3 weeks, that's when you can just call it quits, right?
You definitely.
Yes, I know the feeling. Absolutely. Okay. So we're going to talk about potential opportunities for growth. You know, one of the other things, I probably should have mentioned this to you before you started working on this too. One of the other things you see in the areas that where you may have rated yourselves lower, and I think this is especially true this year, it may be that you also chose not to focus on those areas as much this year, which would be a completely legitimate and valid response. So if you rated yourselves low in an area and said, well, we really didn't do that, it may also have been a choice that you made. Or it may have been a choice that was made for you to focus on other things. So just wanted to bring that up as you start talking about things. Who would like to start? Patterns, things you discussed, things you learned.
I'll jump in. So Martin and I had a great conversation about this category. One thing that struck me was that unlike the last one where we were heavily in standard 3, this one we seem to be hitting more of the standards in various areas. I think most of, if there is a common standard, it was more of standard 1 than any other, but the theme that emerged in each of those standards seemed to be that where we're weak at is in the monitoring or review of data and processes. So we're good at, from the last standard, setting the big goals and the big objective standards, but we seem to be weaker in evaluating the connections underneath of it on a regular basis, is kind of how we described it. Sort of in a weird way, in answering number 3, we feel like in terms of how can we improve this, we feel like we started doing that maybe with adoption of the strategic plan, because that's that maybe the big goal or standard. And now we're developing those frameworks for the monitoring and the reviews to help with implementation that we've been weak on before. So my thought is, where will we see improvement in these numbers in the next few months as we start working the plan a little bit more and doing some of that review? Then you kind of pointed it out as well, is that this is my own aside, looked at some of these questions and went, we might be weak in some of these areas because the question itself was so specific. So was it something we were supposed to know or really ever thought about, or did we intentionally not focus on it this year? So it was understandable that it received a lower score. So that's something maybe looking at this that we should know, or we should put some intentional thought into going forward, because it's there and it's important and there for a reason. So those were my thoughts. If Martin wants to add any.
I think so. I echo the word connections, because I think Julie brought that up, and it's really the connections that makes things happen. So even though this was pretty uniformly distributed between the 5 standards, I think both of us felt it was in that subjective interrelationship aspect that we were talking about. And in that sense, setting up the structure through strategic planning and the other work, that's what happens first. And then you build up the dynamics and then you can measure. And then I just wanted to have my cheap shot budgets. It absolutely drives me crazy. Budgets are not about dollars. Budget's about plans and goals. And that really gets to this same kind of soft power aspect of it.
Yeah, that concept of your budget reflects your values, where you put your money. Yeah. Yeah. Thank you for bringing that up about connections. So I think what I heard from you is that there are some weak connections between what's being implemented, the implementation, and the board's sort of follow up on that, or holding the district accountable, which is standard number 4, which is the one where the most of your low areas were collected. Yeah, interesting.
I think we also related the fact that the strategic plan was fairly new. We've been, strategic plan absent for the most part, operating on an older strategic plan. So we as a board have worked hard to put measurables in that strategic plan and in the superintendent's goals, which are an offshoot of the strategic plan. So now we need to be looking at the data and really digging down into whether or not we're meeting the goals set forward. And if we aren't, what do we need to do to get there? The other, we didn't really have enough time to go through, but we identified, interestingly, that we were most weak in 4, standard 3 and standard 1. Standard 3 was a strength in our last go around, so that was kind of interesting. But in standard 1, we identified the fact that the board does not set goals for its own performance and monitor its progress towards those goals, according to the survey.
Who was your partner?
Maureen, Dr. Gordon. I think Paul. I think in regards to, we kind of looked at standard 1, which is with board governance, the performance, how we evaluate ourselves, but also I think there's a lot of area of improvement. But we talked a lot about standard 4 and 5, which is regarding student learning, tied into the strategic plan. We have a lot of information. We have a lot of assessment data, but there seems to be gaps in the communication from the superintendent to the board, from the board to the community, the district to the community, even to the parent level. Paul?
Yeah. Echo the other comments. I think it will be interesting, come back in a year and take this assessment again with a new strategic plan, with the goals, with the outcomes. But then I connect it to where Maria was going around the budget, where we have a normal cadence of assessment dates. You have that fall, for us, we rely heavily on Lexia and iReady data, that internal data, and having that fall, winter, spring cadence along with smarter balance, whatever that's going to look like, and whenever we get those results. But we have those connection points, and then to Laura and every other points, the strategic plan, how do those relate to where we're trying to go and what we're doing, and having that out there. So we are communicating clearly to the board, to the community, and to others where our district is, that current reality, where we want to go, and the strategies and practices we're implementing to get there. And I think that will be there. It was fascinating. The last one, 53 they were all, don't know, and it's for a good reason. The district plan, what we're working on is the strategic plan. And then each of the schools will have a school improvement plan that is directly related to our strategic plan. And those in our, what we want to have are those coming to the board as well. So the board sees the school improvement plans as well, but they see that direct connection up to their strategic plan and saying, how does this work for Mission View? And what Mission View, what are you working on? Sunny Slope, where are you at in those same relationships? So absolutely right to be the lowest ranked one because we don't have it in practice right now.
Catherine, doesn't number 53 make you feel better?
I think it spoke to the fact that we had not, the strategic plan was just, we just put it out there. We just named it. We just actually put it out there. So it's hard to say that we followed a schedule for the timely review of it or ensured a high degree of coherence between, or number 54, annually reviewed and make recommendations, because the plan just was just named.
Thing I thought about as we were going through here, the board's values of excellence in learning, accountability, and equity. When I think about those pieces, that accountability, and within that definition is that transparency around fiscal transparency, but also academic transparency as well. And those are for us, those three values really drive everything that we did around our strategic plan. Those three things are critical to us, leading with that excellence in learning.
Have you all spent some time as you're looking at your strategic plan to figure out which pieces are really the work of the board and what accountability looks like?
We're doing that at our next board meeting in February, where a big part of our work is around professional learning communities and the role of the board in the professional learning communities.
Right.
So we're trying to tie literally almost everything we do to that work. And if it doesn't connect to that work, why are we doing it?
Mhm. Right. Any other observations? Maybe you heard something someone else said that you want to connect a thought to?
A question came up in my mind. We have had a longstanding practice of improving school improvement plans each year. Every year we've had school administrators coming to, except for the last 2 or 3 years, with the shift in superintendent. So I had always assumed that was in our policies, but now I'm questioning myself, is that a policy that we do that every year and we just haven't been following it, or just a practice? So I'm just questioning myself. And
Which policy are you putting?
the
Board assessment?
know that we would have each school administrator come before the board and talk about, what was achieved in the last year, what the hopes were for the next year, to really give us their picture of where their school was at and where it was going. We had been doing that fairly regularly, and with COVID, everything's been up in the air, but just making me question, wait a minute, I thought that was a board policy, but maybe I'm wrong about that.
That's where a really detailed board calendar can be helpful too, because if it's on the calendar every year, as you roll those over, those are coming up. Anything else?
I just want to, and I think it lends itself to, I think part of the, maybe the reason we're here in standard 1 benchmark of success B, there seems to be more red in that area than in the other areas in regards to board governance. And I just, how can we work together and define processes for gather input? And I think we've all heard about this quite a bit with citizen comments and just in general, but also, how can we as a board improve, set our goals and improve and develop?
So Maria, that's ensuring board is accountable and open to the public, including seeking divergent perspectives in its decision-making process, which is really important and also makes your job harder, because divergent perspectives are great for getting the big picture, but also make it hard to narrow down and make decisions too. Yeah. Anyone else? Okay, rainbow round it is. So let me give you a couple of examples of that. So first of all, let's take a look at your score ranking survey score ranking document. So a little shortcut for you here. If you look across the top where it says average, minimum, maximum, STDEV, that stands for standard deviation. So as you go down and look, there are a couple that are somewhat high on the front, like question number 49 is a standard deviation of 1. There are a couple of them that have a standard deviation of 1. But if you go to page 2, you can see that there are several that have a standard deviation well above 1. There's a 1.4, another 1.4, 1.3. So those are really where you're going to see a lot of those so-called rainbows. So let's take a look, for example, at question number 41, which is, I won't give you the page number because then it would be nice if the page number corresponded with question number. But question number 41. So again, this is a pretty classic rainbow response. You've got, 2 people who said, we do this all the time. One person who said, we never do this. Actually, one person said, most of the time we do this. One said, we never do this. And one said, I don't know if we do this or not. So, that's a great example of one where there's a real divergent response there for folks. Let's see, another good one is, I'll just point this out to you, but you can find them pretty easily just by looking through the report. Number 64 is another one. Very similar in terms of having a broad, see, you don't have to look very far for a divergent range of perspectives, right? They're here, and that actually can be a really valuable thing to a board. But also it means that you have to work hard to come to consensus with each other and figure out what good next steps are. So your teammates for the next grouping are, I seem to constantly lose this piece of paper. I don't know why. Who have you not been paired with yet, right? Too many things everywhere. Let's see. Let me find it. Yeah, that would be that one. Thank you. It was set aside so I would not lose it. Perfect. Okay, so again, you're having conversations about areas where potentially you want to examine, your own cohesiveness. So, if you look at the worksheet on the back, it's the one in the orange, has the orange box. Look at the questions where there's the most variation among your responses. They may look like rainbows. Again, similar questions. Do you see any patterns? Were they clustered within 1 or 2 standard areas? Are there some common themes? And as you're looking at those, think about, are there some areas for your board to increase your cohesiveness or navigate those differences respectfully? And that's something certainly you're having to do at board meetings, but not only with the public, but with each other too. So your groupings, your pairings for this last round, we actually are going to have time to do one more, and we'll do groups of 3 at the last one. And what we'll do is really a roundup. So what are the things overall now that you had these 3 conversations? So this round is going to be Catherine and Martin are paired, Maria and Julie, and Laura and Paul. And you've got 10 minutes. Sounds good. Just wanted to double check. So. Okay, was the rainbow round as fun as it sounded? It is hard, isn't it? It's a hard one. Okay, this is your time to talk with each other about what you saw, what you talked about.
I'll go first this time. Initially, Catherine and I saw no pattern whatsoever. If you looked at frequencies, there were 5 in standard 3 and 3 in standard 5. But then we began digging around, and standard 3's something that you can document and touch. So physical plant was there, curriculum, which is like a technical topic, was there, legislative advocacy was there. There were what I would call technical areas scattered across, but they're ones that you wouldn't be surprised if not everybody knew about. And then the other 3 sort of fell into the community area in standard 5, which we had looked at before. And so I said there's a difference perhaps between correlation and causation, but we were looking at playing detective, that's what it looked like. And then the end point was, have we got an inherited culture on this board where we've actually all grown up at varying paces and have brought that to the board? No, we don't, because we're all brand new and we've gone through COVID. So perhaps that's part of it. And I almost hit the speaking button at the last one when I threw out the word soft power. But to me, soft power is that internal cohesion within a group of people that really makes things happen. So although there was no pattern, it fitted into a community interaction area. It fitted into a technical area, which is difficult for everybody to be familiar with. How do you correct this? By growing together and forming a group and having, and I'm going to say soft power is what really can really count. So that's kind of where we ended up.
Who else?
Laura and I it was interesting to go through them and see one that there weren't a whole lot. I think that was some good news that we didn't have 15 rainbows. But how we saw it, we're kind of lumped in this idea of around communication and awareness. Like the facilities plan is a good one. We've had a facilities plan. We've been working the facilities plan, but it's been pretty quiet, with COVID and everything else. The other one is the curriculum and adoption. I think Laura, literally out of this entire group, has been the only person in this room who's adopted curriculum for WSD, not this superintendent and none of us. So it's that awareness, because we have an incredible process to do it, but none of us have engaged in a curriculum adoption here. So it felt like that communication and that awareness, similar to some of the aspects that you were talking about. Are you aware that these pieces are going on? Like even the superintendent hasn't done a couple of those pieces here.
So when Maria and I were looking at this, one of the observations we made were these, there didn't seem to be a cohesive theme in the questions, but where a lot of these seem to lend themselves were to individual biases in some ways in the questions. Some of them having to deal with the community outreach and those pieces. Some of us have more passion in those areas right now, and maybe that motivated our decision to run for board. So we maybe didn't think we were modeling that very well as a board. Some of these questions too could have been interpreted more. We're subject to interpretation, I think, a little bit more. Am I answering this on my behalf, what I think, what the board does, what I think the district does? So seemed like a couple ways you could look at some of the questions in responding. To your point, we did spend a fair amount of time talking about the curriculum adoption, because I think we agree, and even me being new and not having been through the process, I know that there's a policy and a plan and a program in place. But I don't think I've seen it in play. And I don't know that we've ever communicated that either amongst ourselves, how it works, but to our community, how it works. And I think this year with all the changes at the state level and nationally, it raised a lot of questions in a lot of minds as far as when was the last time this was triggered, that it needed to be done. Have any of these new things that we're doing either under the strategic plan, are these rising to curriculum levels that should be going through this process? So I think there is some confusion in how you can answer some of these, because we know we've got the process in play, but there's not a lot of communication going on about what triggers it, when, and then how do we communicate that better either amongst ourselves and then to our community. Because one of the examples I think that really has landed us in some heat is with Eastmont just doing their work on addressing some of the state law changes on the sex ed curriculum. Well, we have apparently years ago gone through the process we need to go through so we didn't necessarily trigger that, but having the local public know that sort of work was going on right there, it raised questions. Are we supposed to be doing that here? And we're just not. And now we're doing new things. So maybe this is divergent from the question itself, but it was one of those pieces where we know we've got it, but in answering these questions, we don't necessarily know what we're supposed to know at this level or do that at this level or communicate it at this level.
I don't think your thoughts are off base at all. I think they're right on. And I think they're connected to what Martin said too. Because you're talking about these state and national issues, putting things like curriculum and also equity issues out there that then raise questions at a local level. And you as a new team haven't developed the team culture yet to be able to even have some of those conversations. And of course, you don't have the experience. I mean, that's really fascinating, Laura, that you're the only one out of the whole team, including your superintendent, who's gone through a curriculum process. Yeah, so you've got a lot of teaching to do, right? We'll put it all on Laura, right? Fascinating. Yeah, I think that's really other thoughts related to that or related to the conversations you had.
Just a lot of learning to do. Like Julie mentioned, we spend a lot of time on this and, creating understanding and communication. There's, what's happening is there's a lot of assumptions, is our, what is it? Sexual health education. That's not a new curriculum to the school district, but how many of us know that or don't know that? And same thing with SEL. Is that a curriculum? Is that a program? Is that an appendix to something else? And then since we're on this topic and this is my jam, it's oftentimes an elephant in the room with question 64, which was ranked pretty high in that deviation in regards to sensitivity and understanding of cultural, racial, and ethnic understanding. As a board, as a district, we have made huge strides. As a board, we have too. But one of the things I have personally been advocating is for cultural sensitivity training, because as I've mentioned before, we are here to serve all students, regardless of their background, of the programs they qualify for, their primary language. But as the only person of color on the board, I oftentimes feel like I'm the voice of those that are advocating, the only one that's advocating for a group of students. And again, my role is to represent all students, right? To advocate for all students and not just a specific population. But then there's that fine line of cultural sensitivity. How do we go there and help each other out without with having that sensitivity? I want to say filter, but that's a really it's really difficult because just in community and in this role, comments that have been made that, might not be hurtful towards me, but they have been hurtful towards other people in our community, our students. So how do we work on this? We're kind of all over the board in regards to this response. And I think if anything, it helps us grow as a board to better serve our students.
What are some other thoughts on that? It is interesting to see that one being all over the board. What do you make of that?
Well, I think for one thing, it's become a hot button issue more recently. And there are polarizing opinions in the community. And, some of us are, maybe all of us, maybe four of us, I don't know, are sort of sorting through, well, where do we land on that? I never really thought of that as a political issue before, for me, just speaking for me personally. And so everybody is in their own journey, and in terms of digesting all the various ways of communicating that are out there in the world. We're hearing, on social media, we're hearing from our friends and neighbors, we're hearing in the newspaper, we're hearing on the news at night, that this cultural DEI is a hot topic. So it's hard to come from a place where you didn't necessarily need to think about that all the time to now we've got to think about it all the time and how it. So I just think everybody's in a different place, and it would be good for us to sit down and have some focus time together on the topic so that we can be more cohesive in our district strategies. Period. Yeah.
Other thoughts on that?
I am hitting the button before I've thought.
Always dangerous.
I know, but I think that's the only way to address this issue, because it's all there, and Maria is exactly right. And each of us brings a different background to, and a different sensitivity. Maybe I will start that, I have lived and worked in a lot of different cultures. So in one sense, that makes me less sensitive because I'm kind of accustomed to differences and that we have to work our way through them. And I guess, I hit the button because I think it needs to, and it needs to be addressed and brought in the open. But I guess I end up on a don't know, except that we better talk to each other.
Catherine, Julie, Paul, anything you want to add? No pressure, but just
Well,
giving the opportunity.
Yeah, I echo what Martin says. I also grew up in so many different places, around so many different people. I'm an Army brat, spent every high school in a different school. I've lived in too many states to name, and out of the country. So I echo what Martin says. Maybe I am less sensitive because the diversity has always been around me. I have always been around and raised that way, so that it wasn't. Maybe I am less sensitive, as Martin is saying, because it has just always been my life. Everybody, a huge amount of diversity my whole life, having been in so many places with so many different people.
I think I quickly want to make sure we're talking the same meaning of the word sensitive. I don't mean not being sensitive to differences. I mean not, I'm trying to think of a calm word, recognizing that it's normal to have it and you got to deal with it. In that sense, you're not sensitive, you're not reacting extremely because you know you have to deal with it and it's real, but you are sensitive to its reality. And I'm going to look, am I translating that decently?
No, you are. So hearing the word sensitive, maybe we need to be more sensitive about it, and be more aware, right? I'm sensitive because my experiences are different than Martin, right? So I'm aware because I see it, I've lived it, right? So being aware of the discrepancies or the lack of sensitivity towards a culture, towards a gender or just different categories. I think that's how we get there, is by being aware and empathy, sensitivity and empathy, I guess. Sorry, I just hijacked your word.
No, I think you said it right. No, awareness is better. I think we need to talk about awareness on one hand, where, if you used to it being something that you have to think about, and sensitive meaning that you deal with it with empathy. That would be how I would put the two characteristics.
With the board in March, our March workshop is on this topic, as one of the state expectations for boards is to have that bias training working through. But as a district, we went away from a vision statement. We went to a promise statement where we would literally say, we promise to build a foundation of diversity, equity, and inclusion from which each student emerges future ready. We recognize the power and the importance of diversity, of equity, and of inclusion. Without those pieces, each of our students won't be ready for their own future. So it's central to the board, what we do, and I appreciate what others said. We have to start talking about it. We have to be putting it at the center, and that it's not this bad thing or divisive thing. Let's talk about what those words mean, and change theory. It's called meaning making. Do we all have the same understanding of the word diversity? Do we all have the same understanding of the word equity? Do we all understand where we're coming from, the word inclusion, and really start demystifying those words and those terms? And how does that actually impact a kid's life when kids are seen, valued, and heard, and accepted for who they are as their authentic self? How does that help? And the research is huge, voluminous amount of research when kids see themselves and know that they are seen, valued, and heard. Their academic performance continues to rise, and why we put it as a foundational aspect of our promise statement, because we believe that when you have those pieces in place, the future ready aspect starts to take care of itself.
Anything else there?
I just have a thought, like, how do we, the world is so polarized and politicized, and lots of words around DEI work are triggers, and in different ways. So how can we, I think I'm capable of removing that politicalization in order to have a conversation that's beneficial to students, and probably each of us are as individuals. And yet the reality is that we live in a world where all of these divergent ideas and definitions exist. So the challenge to me is, how do we arrive at a common understanding with ourselves, with the rest of the district? But then the greater challenge to me is presenting it out to the rest of the world and not be attacked.
I believe the only way to do it is ongoing conversations. We have to engage in the conversations and really set, a really good, safe environment where people can feel like they can share, where they're at in their journey. And then for the district, the board, and others to really talk about where we're going with our kids. And I continue to bring this back to our students and about our why of why we show up. Why did you run for the board? Hey, it wasn't to work directly with the superintendent. It was to make an impact. As lovely as I am, like, ooh, I want to work with that guy. That's not why you ran. You ran because you want to make a difference in the lives of kids, of all kids, not just your own. For some of us, our kids are adults, and they're out leading their own lives. But why? The why is from all of our conversations, it's about our kids. And when we bring it back to our kids, our scholars, that's when I think it's a much deeper, richer conversation and not just the political conversation. And I'm not naive enough not to believe that that won't happen, because I know there will be some of that. But we have to step in that arena. We have to step in that arena. We have to have those conversations as why this is so critical for our kids. Thanks.
I think what I heard from all of you as you were looking at these areas where, which are the standard areas or the specific benchmarks where you really differed from each other. And it feels like they fell into two buckets. And one bucket was stuff we do or we've done, like, curriculum, facilities planning, that just not all of us know about, right? That was one bucket. And the other bucket is areas where we have different definitions from each other. And that would include this one that we're talking about, cultural, racial, and ethnic understanding and sensitivity. And then also probably community engagement. I think you probably all have different ideas. Sounds like you have different ideas about what community engagement means to you. So I would suggest those are two areas. The other pieces, the curriculum and the facilities, you're going to get caught up in that. We will return to a time when we adopt curriculum and build new facilities. I'm confident in that eventually. So the areas where you could design some time to really delve into what does it really mean to us when we say the words community engagement? What does that really mean? What does it look like? And where are the areas that we overlap in our beliefs around that? And the areas where we don't overlap, what could we learn from each other? So those might be some areas where you could really delve into for some future conversations. So I'm going to just give you a chance. Let's look at the blue. The blue column is kind of recurring themes. So just take a minute or two to just think on your own, reflecting on the conversations you've had. Are there some areas? What are some recurring themes that you heard? On what topics was there broad agreement? What topics do you want to study more or have conversations more about? I'll just give you 2 or 3 minutes to think on your own. You can jot some things down if you want, and then I'll just let you go around and share individually. So go ahead and wrap up what you're thinking, and then we'll take a chance to share out. We're going to make Paul go first because he wasn't in the room. That's what you got. Does anyone need one more minute? Everybody's good. Julie, do you mind starting? We can go around the room. That way we'll give Paul a little extra time. Looks like he needs some extra time on his homework. If you don't mind.
So, I mean, you did such a nice job talking about your buckets and what things fall in. And so that's kind of where I think we appeared to be most in agreement on things we're having to do with big picture, more objective processes and procedures, setting setting and communicating out the big picture goals. What I would like to work on is developing or talking about developing better processes to build those connections, to review and analyze data and metrics, and then to have conversations about how we improve our accountability to our community and our involvement to our community. Those would be some big pieces that I would like to study a little bit more.
Thank you.
So I think that communication came out as a big topic. Communication with the community, within the district, with each other. There's areas where we're doing well and areas that we need to improve, like Julie said, on some of those already. Detailed processes like budgeting, we're doing well. We're just launching off on our strategic plan. So, you know, I think it's only natural that there's some lack of consensus on those items because we just haven't gone through those together. I think it's very important for us as a board to work on common understandings and definitions of the various words that we use when we're discussing, and share those out with the community as best that we can. I'm just made aware about the importance of a detailed calendar. That is something that in the past the board has worked with the superintendent on, to establish different topics that we wish to study throughout the year and address. I mean, there are some contractual items that we're required to do. There are legislative items that we're required to do. And it would be really nice to see those laid out so that we can all have sort of a top of mind awareness on what we're doing when.
Well, I think 1 and 2 have been covered. I have community communication and understanding. Like Julie mentioned, you know, we do have processes and procedures in place, and how do we communicate, engage our community in such processes and communication. We're not creating them. They're already there. The data is already there. The procedures are already there, but there seems to be a little bit of a gap in communication and a lot of learning on our part. How do we get there? There's a lot to learn. And then at what point is, you know, what do we study more deeply, but with the fine understanding of it's more of knowledge, understanding without going too deep under the surface. And I don't know if I'm communicating this clearly, but you know, as a board, is it our role to understand the process and then procedures, or is our role to also manage that? I think as the more we know, the more we want to get involved and what's our role as a board as well.
The first word I wrote down was signaling, and I'll relate it like Laura did too. So we used a calendar of topics because I think it is helpful to think ahead on a rolling plan. However, I do see that as awkward and open to over-interpretation, because when you put out a calendar, it's going to change and different people will have different interpretations of what's in it. But we need to do more of that, I think. The other part that I think I felt we picked up from this is, and I'm just using these words, it's the systems that link the pieces without which there is no whole. Now that's, Joy, the ligaments, not just the bone.
Say that again.
The systems, we talk about communication, we talk about monitoring, we talk about regularity. Those are the systems that flow between the hubs. And if you don't have those systems, the hubs don't perform to maximum efficiency. And then we have the interesting situation is this is an oversight board, not an executive board. And so, where does the board fit in, what they can do? Modeling is one thing that the board can do, encouraging and that kind of thing. But actually, we probably don't do the actual systems within it. So we would like to see them happen, and we can help or hinder by the way we behave on the board and the questions we ask and the incentives we give. So I see all of that as work to do, developing. And I think I call that 2A, and 2B would be structure first, the strategic plan and everything that the district's putting together. And then that goes together, and that's a job to do. And then the other one, I'm just going to use the word differences. We talked about sensitivity and the external politics. I like to take that head on by using the two words, human capital. That's everybody, and it does it. And hopefully there's goodwill, regardless of what you think, that all people deserve the very best that they can achieve. And so that's a way that perhaps we can take on the conflict that we know it is inevitable on Earth, but we can do it in a constructive way and win allies and goodwill.
I think Martin should have to show his diagram because it shows this giant brain. I think you should show that for everyone.
You can submit that for evidence later.
Yeah.
Show your work.
I jotted down a few points, and that just quickly off the top of my head, I did not collaborate after listening to everybody. Lack of information on board workings, that applies mostly to me, but in those questions that were all over the place. Budget information is good. Communication to the community needs work. Strategic plan is new and needs time for evaluation and assessment. And definitions could be made more clear for all. Yeah,
Great, thank you.
I went to all the pieces that were said, but I think more time working together as a team. I mean, this was super beneficial from my perspective. To work through those different topics around, communication, because that's a broad overarching topic. I think we do a really great job of communication, but what are those specific things that we need to do a better job of communicating on? What does community engagement look like? But for the board to really answer that question, because it looks differently, because board meetings aren't community engagement. That's a place for the board to do their work. And a lot of people confuse those two things. So I think more time together on like 3 or 4 real, these big pieces that the board has identified. So we have that meaning making, we have that shared understanding of what those things are. And I have clear guidance from the board as what the board wants from those pieces.
Great. Anything anyone wants to add? That anyone want to look at Martin's diagram over there? Okay, perfect. We have what's that?
Said how many public records requests we'll get for it?
Yeah, for the diagram. It better be a good one. See, it's really built up in my mind now. Okay, so we have about a half an hour left, and I want to give you a little bit of time. You all kind of led us into this, which is the last topic on the agenda, is sort of talking about, you know, your roles and responsibilities. So as you work together and as you develop that culture, you know, it kind of starts with orientation, Catherine. So there's the orientation, but then there's also the culture building as a team. So that, you know, all of that is kind of a continuum of learning and becoming a team together. So in many ways, orienting a new board member can actually be a really nice culture building experience, because it requires you to say to yourselves, what is important to us? What is it that we're telling her? You know, we want to make sure that you all are sharing what your values are. So it can be really helpful. So I'm going to break you out into 2 teams of 3, again, just to give you a little time to, and I'm only going to probably give you about 8 minutes to do that, maybe 10. We'll see how you're doing in your conversations, because then I want you to have a chance to come back and talk together. So I'm going to have you as groups look at questions 1 and 2 under roles and responsibilities, if you look back at your agenda. And those are: consider some areas where the board superintendent roles and responsibilities seem unclear, or the team is not in alignment. How do you navigate those roles in areas that are executed and managed by the superintendent, but the board has oversight, specifically, you know, fiduciary oversight, among others? So it's this rub between, you're supposed to be at oversight level, but you also have some specific responsibilities. So thinking about that, because that's a challenge for every single school board. And then based on the conversations that we just had, I think you may have actually just answered this, but consider if there's anything that's missing. Based on those conversations, what areas would the team benefit from having greater clarity or agreement in your complementary but different roles and responsibilities? And then we'll close out with number 3 being your exit ticket for the day. Okay. So if you could, I now finally at the last 4th round have found my conversation group list. I'm a slow learner. So if you could get together Martin, Julie, and Paul, and Maria, Laura, and Catherine, and tackle questions number 1 and 2. Let's aim for 8 minutes. I'll walk around and see how mad you are at me by stopping your conversations at 8 minutes. Kind of a boring meeting for you, huh? I realize that was a huge question to throw at you, but let's think of these conversations as a down payment. This is a big one, and for those of you who are still chatting, I think the conversation we're going to have just here for about 10 minutes is probably just a down payment for you in terms of future conversations. So we'd like to start. Do you have a diagram?
Myself. This time there will be no diagram. I think the most valuable bottom line that I felt came out of our group is creating a structure of communication, trust, the right space, not too much questioning, was the calendar of events. If we do that, we know what's coming, we can anticipate. We talked quite a bit about the difficulty of communicating director to superintendent and then sharing it with other people. But I think that's a different issue. But the calendar of events, if we work on that, I think, or topics, I think that would go a long way towards getting us to behave, and then we can cue each other.
Yeah, everybody needs to behave. So our conversation never left number one.
Okay.
So we were talking about board and superintendent roles and responsibilities seeming unclear. So the board has some very basic duties, but there was some discussion about, well, some conversations dig into the details of certain things, and why is that not getting into the weeds? Well, sometimes the board needs to go a little bit into the weeds because we have a duty to protect the district from liability. And sometimes that means talking about some things that aren't pretty, or, maybe sometimes are based in rumor initially, but there's some factual, so it's a balancing act always. We don't want to become, a group of hens complaining about this or that around the district, but we do have a responsibility. And I shared the example of, when digging into the weeds is something that I regretted maybe not doing. And that is when the student died in the pool several years ago. And, in after fact, there were some things that were not in place that protected that student. And did I have direct supervision over that staff person? No, but, I do have a background in aquatics. So could I have looked into that and asked some more pointed questions? Probably. At some point in my boardsmanship, I could have done that. So it's a balancing act.
I just add balancing act and no answers, no easy answers but work on it.
I'd love to hear from each of you if you don't mind, or let you all hear from each of you. It's not about me, it's about what you hear from each other.
Well, just to piggyback off, like Laura said, we kind of never left one. And, what I've been in this capacity 2 years, but most of the first 2 years have been so COVID related, right? And so that's why, we engage so much in this question, even now, even though I've been in this role for 2 years, there's that, that balance. Okay, what's our role and responsibility, and when is it necessary to dive in deeper and either ask more questions or become involved, whether it's a process, personnel, and so that's kind of where I guess still a little bit of lack of understanding, because Laura is right. People are looking to the school board when, they're mainly unhappy. Once in a while, we'll hear good stories. And so for us to, we are the face of the district, and how do we respond to that? And Is it just informational? Is it involvement? Is it part of the process? So just that fine line, it's not all black and white, but what's that gray area for us? And as a board member, it's all going to be situational. I understand that, but I don't know. It's just, it's a hard balance. A little bit in regards, we didn't talk about this too much, but I think these type of conversations, I think team for question number 3, team building is huge. Like Martin said, he doesn't like being, he's still adjusting to having the spotlight, the limelight. And for me, it's about being comfortable working with all 5 of us, all 6 of us working together and not feeling that anxiety to bring up topics. Because whether I'm going to be judged by my colleagues or by the communities, whoever's watching, am I saying things right? Am I spending too much time on this topic? So I think once we feel more comfortable around each other, I think, that anxiety of bringing up, Laura, what do you think? 17 years? Does it go away?
Just wait till you get to be the president.
I was going to say, Laura, I think you should lie to her.
So, I was actually fortunate. I had lunch with Catherine this
nice.
week, and it was actually, we talked about this. We just need, to get to know each other on a professional, but also on a personal level. And I think once we are able to kind of remove some of our walls and our barriers, I think it'd be benefit for us and our community and our students. Yeah. Julie, I see you.
Oh, you're like, maybe not. Maybe you didn't do that on purpose.
Oh, no, it's my turn. I'll go. No, this was an interesting one because in my professional role, I'm always on the other side of the board administration dynamic. I can tell my client, that public agency, what these roles look like and what you're supposed to do, but being part of it is very different. And it is very much a balancing act because there's the technical roles, and then what does that really mean in practice? What should I know when the community says, hey, did you know XYZ is going on? Can you look into this for me? Or me as a parent, I try to be mindful of access. And when I'm asking a question that is this too super focused on a particular subject, on a particular issue, because the experience I'm having with my kid or what I've heard from people versus what is in the best interest of helping run the organization. So there's that balance of trying to, because I don't want to bog Paul down with a ton of questions. Hey, I'm hearing this, or hey, I want some more of this, or next board meeting, can you bring this? And one of the things we talked about, some of the processes that I see to help with oversight and management is that we've never adopted here. I'm not suggesting necessarily that we should or do it, but I know a lot of agencies, or I work with a lot of agencies where they've got it, if you're the board president communicates to the superintendent and the rest of the board sort of goes through the president to the superintendent. So the superintendent or mayor, manager, whoever it is, isn't getting 5 different requests from 5 different people on 5 different topics. So there's that sort of basic vetting. I don't necessarily see it as an issue, but it is just one of those kind of, is that something to look at operationally? Would it help Paul to have a sole main focus? Would it build trust in our board that we're not going behind and asking 16 different things and suddenly things are showing up on agendas, or things you thought were going to be on agendas aren't on agendas, but I think having that calendaring kind of big items to signal things are coming up, we're hearing you, we're seeing. Part of what we talked about as well is we don't give Paul a lot of maybe direction because we don't know, we're all still so new, many of us so new that we don't know what to direct, or he's not asked for, are you directing me to do this? So it's, as we get more comfortable in what we can and should and do know, it'll feel more organic. But it is an interesting dichotomy from what I know in my practice and profession and what I can tell you to do, but then being on the other side and going, God, I really want to know that, but it's not my job.
Yep, that's a hard one, isn't it?
My kid came home from school and said this, and I really want to call Paul.
Yeah. That's so normal, Julie. I mean, that just, I think probably everybody in this room has felt that way at one point or another. And sometimes it's asking the question too, like, hey, Paul, I have this really challenging thing going on at the school. I don't know if it's appropriate for me to talk with you about this or not. Sometimes just that can be really helpful. Or I am really struggling with something that's on the agenda, but I think I may be delving into the weeds. Can we talk about whether this is? I mean, just the ability to ask each other, how does it feel if I do this? Does this feel right? Or is this a better way for me to do it? So I love that honesty. That's you stated something I think everybody has felt from time to time.
Can I
Catherine,
say something?
oh,
Can
go
I
ahead.
add something?
Of course,
So
of course.
what I've observed in 18-ish years is that the board can be less prescriptive in conversations when there's good cohesion amongst the board and a good working relationship amongst the board. It's not, when I was the president, it wasn't an issue with me if any of you would have called Paul to ask him a question. I mean, we certainly don't want to overwhelm him. But I've also experienced a board that was very much not cohesive. And the superintendent was just inundated with minutia from multiple fronts. And so it's situational, really, how much the board needs to control the flow of communication.
Great point.
I asked kind of jokingly for your definition again that you gave us at the start of our little mini conversation, but I ask for it truly now. I think that, we were talking about definitions. What is a defined definition or defined statement of what the board's job is? I think that it was very interesting to hear you say that just very briefly. This is, we do this and this way, and we hire this, and this, I for me, it would be beneficial to see that in writing. This is your job, simply, and I appreciated that. But I also just very quickly, that it's very sobering to hear, you speak about this child that we lost and how huge a responsibility it feels that is to you, and therefore should be to us, because there is nothing more important than the safety of our scholars, our students, and that is very sobering to hear.
It is, and it should be, and it's something that I will carry in my heart forever. I will never forget Antonio Reyes, ever. And the board policies in the 1000 series provide a lot of information about what the board's role is.
Catherine, did you go to board boot camp?
I did.
Okay,
I did. Yeah,
yeah.
I did.
There's
And I
one there too.
I remember you.
Excellent.
But also to Maria's point, I am a relational type of person, and I feel strongly too that having a good relationship with each other just makes everything better, easier, and work better. I think we'll do a better job for the students, for our community, when we get to know each other better and have a easier rapport with one another, and so.
Paul, do you want to add anything as we kind of close out today?
I had to add that currently, and with this board and the previous two boards, the level of communication I get from the board, I think is very doable. But I would totally agree with Laura. It is all situational. I've been in other situations where it was just like, oh my goodness, I need a filter, and people have to somehow check themselves. But honestly, this board, the previous board, and board before that, it wasn't this inundation of Paul and do this, do that. This board, and again, the previous board, were really great at not directing the superintendent individually. There was never any, we don't get emails or phone calls that say, Paul, you have to do this. I think the board has recognized they come together. There's questions, and we always want those. I always want those questions. But I think it's another place to do that is making sure that we're asking those questions at the board table. We have consensus that we're directing the superintendent in this area. One of the things I did do in a former district was on the agenda at the end of the meeting are there any agenda topics that any board members want to have the board president, the superintendent talk about, and then put it on an agenda. It doesn't mean the next one, but it's signaling from the board that I'm interested in this. And that helped. And again, it wasn't like there was a laundry list of things that the board listed out there. It'd be like one every once in a while, but it helped I've been wondering, to Julie's point, I've been wondering about this. But I think the other piece that will be very helpful is when we calendarized the academic updates, when we align it with the strategic plan, and then us administration putting out to the board saying, this is how we're going to organize that data. Is there any other way that you would like to see that data and that helps. So we're delivering what the board would like to see, what we think would be the best way to do it, but also making sure the board has feedback on that type of presentation as well. So it's just a different way of looking at it.
I have a lot of samples of different types of board calendars from across the state. And so I'd be happy to share those with you. Yep. Because it's really helpful to look at a number of different kinds and think about which would work best for you. And you might take one and modify it. You might find something perfect. You might design your own, and then I'll have a new sample. So that would be great. So we're right at 4 o'clock. I want to be respectful of everybody's time. And maybe if each of you wouldn't mind just having a last word, and I'll start, which I just want to share with you how impressed I am with how all of you really dug in to this today and listened to each other respectfully, and we're willing to just have some conversations about things areas where you have questions or you're unsure. And I would really recommend you continue leaning into those. There is nothing wrong saying in front of a packed boardroom, I'm not sure what our next step is here. Can we talk about that? It's okay. It's human. It's normal. And it really helps you build a culture too. So you might not do it right now, but again, think about some ways that you can kind of humanize how you work with each other. And again, just thank you so much for allowing me to come in and facilitate the conversations for you. I'll let you start wherever you want. I'd love to just have a last word from someone, not for me, but to you, to each other.
I will just say that circling all the way back to how would our time today feel successful question, I put, if we could have engaging, positive conversations and leave feeling like a team. And I think we really did that today. So I feel like this was successful.
I feel like it was a success also. I think, I mentioned having common understanding about how we operate and work together. And I think we do have more of that than we had before we started. And it's a work in progress.
I'm looking forward to part 2. Part of professional development. I think this is part of it. And hopefully it's not the only one we get to experience. Like we have you close by, you or somebody else. But I think part of our professional development should be maybe a quarterly or twice a year, engaged in this type of activity.
I want to go last.
Okay. His is the last word.
I really don't have much to add, except that again, I think we have grown and come to know each other better. And I very much look forward to more of that.
echo those thoughts. I think we're a stronger team and we continue to build on that.
Right, I'm on now. What next? I think we should all sleep on it and maybe feed in thoughts and follow up to Paul. I think to allow the work we've done today to bounce around in our brains is a good idea. So that was the one thing I wanted to say last. And then I wanted to thank Paul and the four of us, four people, colleagues and me, and indirectly, we took risks, we exposed ourselves, and that was a brave thing to do. And I just want to thank you all for that. And you did your job with the community by doing it that way. I think that's really important. And I think, Laura, did you say work in process? Anyway, we're on a road to improvement. Let's not concern ourselves about exactly where we are, but what we need to do is move forward and know we're doing it. And I can't thank you enough for coming and leading us. I really appreciate it, Tricia.
It's
You
my
did a great
pleasure.
job. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. So you all noticed me taking lots of notes, and I will organize these notes for you and get them back to you. And then that gives you the opportunity, once you've done exactly what Martin has said, slept on it, maybe a couple nights, and then you can take a look at the notes, and that gives you maybe even a list of some of the next topics that you take on. So thank you so much for your time today. It's been a pleasure to get to know all of you. Okay.
Thank you.
Yeah, of course.